Hi, friends. Todd Fields here, Worship Circle Podcast. Proud to have my friend Adam Young. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, man. I'm really excited about this, you guys, because in what we do with Worship Circle over the years, we always just try to say, Lord, what are you up to? And it so happens that just God has orchestrated my connection with Adam. I mean, Adam, you've got this podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves. I was looking online and you posted a while back, you guys have had 10 million downloads. It's been such a resource for me on my journey. And kind of where we're going to go today with this conversation is, I was that guy, and I think a lot of us are those people in ministry that's like, man, my job is to output and to serve and to get people to pray the prayer. And we want to get as many people in the building as we can. And so that's a mission, that's an idea. But back, some years ago, I started having some trouble just in my marriage and my family. And it was like, hey, where's this coming from? Where did it maybe originate? And so I've been on this journey toward knowing myself, kind of plugging into this. And so you and I got connected in the flesh last February at a thing you were doing, a story work conference with Dan Allender, Kathy Lorzell at Trinity Anglican. And man, the rest is kind of history so far. That's crazy and then you told me we had met like years ago at our friend Chad's wedding, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, just thank you for jumping in, and thank you for what you do. Man, some great questions coming up, but how did you're trucking along. I know you were in ministry, you were a pastor. Mm-hmm. What happened in you to go, man, there's maybe more under the hood here than I've paid attention to. And Lord, what do I do about this?
Yeah. Well, I found myself as a 35-year-old man in Atlanta, as a pastor, and we could put it this way, I had symptoms.
Right.
I had lots of symptoms.
Right.
Anxiety, depression, relationship problems, marriage problems with God. It was hard to be in my body. It was hard to deal with my emotions. It was hard to stay regulated. And I didn't even have language for any of that at the time. I just knew that it was not easy being alive.
Right.
And so I began to, it's not that I began as a 35-year-old. I began in college desperately seeking answers to the question of why does it hurt so much inside?
Right.
And why is my inner life seem to be so different than my friends?
Right.
And that put me on a journey of a lot of prayer, a lot of Bible reading, a lot of desperate mentors, counseling. But it wasn't until I was introduced to the idea that I had a story in my family of origin that was playing out in my present life. Mm-hmm. When I got introduced to that as a concept, things started shifting for me. I had no category for the idea that my past, growing up in my family, the oldest of 3 children in Connecticut in the 80s, those experiences had shaped the brain that was in my head and doing my life as a 35-year-old. But lo and behold, those are very related because we have neurons, and that's how neurons operate. And so my introduction to the story work came through a book called The Wounded Heart by Dan Allender. And when I read it, it just described the landscape of my insides, of my heart, better than anything I had ever read. And that was the start of my journey into story work.
Man, you mentioned your body.
Yeah.
I know for those of us in ministry and just growing up in the church, I don't know that I ever paid attention to my body.
Right.
Like it's like take that concept and just move it over into left field. Let's focus on home plate.
Right.
And you mentioned that, and I know some other friends we know, Kathy and Dan, mentioned this idea of paying attention to your body. It has been such a gift to me.
Yes.
To do that. And I'm sitting here going, for all of our worship leaders listening and all of our pastors listening, I want you guys to hear this conversation Adam and I are having, because both of us have been and are in ministry. And we're bringing up this idea that I don't think the church universally has paid attention to in recent days.
Yes. A friend of mine, a pastor up in Queens, New York, a guy named Rich Viotis, they have a saying in their church that the body is a major prophet, not a minor prophet. And it's a great turn of phrase, especially for evangelicals, because for whatever reason, a lot of kind of broadly speaking evangelical Christian types have the notion that what matters is what's above my neck. What matters is my head, and my body is really just a vehicle for my head.
Right.
And my head has my thoughts, my convictions, my doctrinal beliefs. And my body is really just carrying that head through space.
Right.
And we have to come to terms with the fact that Paul claimed that the body is the temple of God. Now that is at that time period in the first century, the notion that the human body was the place where the divine intersected the earth, which is what the temple was, the place where the Shekinah glory of God took up residence.
Right.
To suggest, as Paul does, that your body is a place where the Shekinah glory of God in the person of Jesus resides, that was, I mean, such a new idea.
Right.
And we still really haven't caught up to that. But it's changing. It's changed for me, and it's changing for you. And by changing, what I mean is that I'm beginning to listen to the sensations in my gut, my throat, my chest, my shoulders, my pelvis. You have sensations all day long. And those sensations tell the truth about either what's happening in your body in the present or what is getting stirred up for you from the past. But either way, it's vital information.
That's so good. So I'm envisioning worship leaders and pastors listening to this and thinking, if I work better at how I communicate, if I study more, if I memorize more scripture, if I apply more principles, then that's going to produce a healthy church.
Yeah.
And so with where we're going with this talk, Adam, it's just like, in what I'm seeing in myself and the people that I know that are kind of leaning into this, just talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the landscape of church. And what is the pushback? Like, we got people like dying all over the place, leaving staffs, people combusting, and no one's asking this question, what happened to you?
Yes. Yeah. What I would say is that generally speaking, the church has reversed character and gifting. We have gotten confused about character and gifting and which one is more important. For a worship leader, for a pastor, for any Christian leader, according to Jesus, character, according to the scriptures, character always trumps gifting. But that's not how the human heart tends to operate. We are drawn by fire. And what I mean by fire is talent, charisma, somebody that can play, I'm from the 80s, right? Like Bon Jovi, lick on the guitar.
Right.
Like that changes, back to body. That makes you feel intense sensations in your body.
Gotcha.
The solo to Sweet Child of Mine. We're drawn to that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's a human thing. But when you're drawn to brilliance, when you're drawn to charisma, when you're drawn to gifting, character can get lost. And then the train goes off the rails.
Right. You said, first of all, guys, the Place We Find Ourselves podcast is amazing. And Adam Young Counseling on Instagram. I follow you, Adam, but you put quotes up there. And you've mentioned story, and I feel like God's leading this ministry into this idea of doing story work. And it seems like a big iceberg, a big monumental thing. But you said something the other day when you were with us online, because you spoke to our entire tribe. You said, I would rather, when we ask people to tell their stories, generally they say something about what it looks like from 30,000 feet. My mom was an alcoholic. My dad was this. And then you're like, you move on with your day. And you said, I would rather hear one clear on the ground moment from your family of origin than your generalization of your story.
That's it.
And it's like you were saying, I could tell more from that one little slice of you letting me into your experience than would happen for you just to say, well, I had a messed up family and I'm okay now.
Yeah. That's right. I believe that with all my heart. So for me, the way I kind of narrated my story at 30,000 foot level was my mother was this tender, compassionate, kind gift from God to compensate for a violent and abusive father. My dad was a veteran of the Vietnam War. He had full-blown PTSD, and he was a violent man at times. And that was how I told my story. However, I could also tell you an on-the-ground story. By on the ground, I mean with details, with character, with plot, with themes, with setting. For example, this is just a snippet that comes to mind. When I played soccer as, an 8-year-old, my dad would not stand with the other parents. He would stand, I was the striker on the team, so he would stand at the opposing team's penalty box. And when I would dribble through everybody, because all that matters when you're 8 is not talent, it's drive. And I had drive. Yeah. And I would dribble through everyone, and then everything would go quiet, and I would hear my dad's voice and only my dad's voice, and he would yell, "Strike it," and I'd shoot the ball and score a goal.
Wow.
And for a moment, I had my dad's attention.
Wow.
Now you can feel in your body the difference between those two stories.
Right.
The 30,000 foot view and the on the ground, on the soccer field view. One is general and rather opaque. Mm-hmm. The other gives you access to the sensations in my body, the emotions in my heart, and really the desires in my gut that drive us all through life. What the 17th century Puritans called the affections. Mm-hmm. It's the part of you that longs, that wants, that yearns. Mm-hmm. And that part of you is very important to God.
Yeah. You mentioned in our time together previously that we've all been harmed. Mm-hmm. And, since I've started doing work with you, I kind of went to all my sons, just 4 of them, and I said, it was almost, it just freed me. Like, I went to everyone by name and said, I have harmed you.
That's right.
And I said, if at any point now or in the future, a moment comes up in which I harmed you, you have an open door to my heart. I will not defend myself. I just want to be with you in it.
That's it.
And so help me understand and just kind of communicate that to our listening audience that it's not disrespecting your parents to say you harmed me.
No, it's not. A lot of people get hung up with the command, honor your father and mother. Jesus had no interest in dishonesty, sugarcoating, sweeping things under the rug. The reason that Jesus came is to reconcile sinner to sinner. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, have a very hard time believing that their parents are sinners. They'll acknowledge it cognitively. But if I said to you, okay, well, give me an example of how your father harmed you when you were in middle school.
Yeah.
They'll be like, well, I don't think he really, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Well, then you've got an intellectual problem because sin is not abstract. There's nothing abstract about the cross.
Right.
Harm has been done by all and to all. And if that's true, for example, I know I've harmed my children.
Yeah.
I know it. I can name specific instances. I know I've harmed my wife. Well, how is it then that it's so hard for me to put on a 3x5 card a couple bullets of how my mother harmed me?
Yeah.
Because she did, because she's a sinner. And naming that is actually honoring her because it's inviting her into a process of reconciliation, of repentance, of renewal of the relationship. And that's what Jesus is all about.
Wow. That's so good. And so new for, I think, a lot of us to think about as we even pay attention to our story. The word trauma, for those listening, like this, we've been doing worship leader interviews and, different artists have been on, and the trajectory of our ministry has been what it's been. God's led us into this idea of letting people know they're loved and not alone. But you mentioned the word trauma, and I just want you to explain that briefly for people listening, because they may be like, man, I hear that word a lot nowadays.
Yes.
But I didn't
Yeah.
have any trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. The word gets thrown around a lot today. Let me define it. The hallmark of trauma is two things: powerlessness to use your voice or move your body in such a way to make the bad thing stop happening. So, for example, 9/11, when people were at ground zero and there's debris falling on them, they can't, it's overwhelming. They can't use their voice or move their body in a way to stop the cement
Right.
from falling. So that's trauma. Similarly, a 5-year-old, when they're being physically, emotionally, sexually abused, they don't have the power to use their voice or move their body in a way to make the bad thing stop. So number one feature of trauma is powerlessness. The second feature of it is abandonment by potentially protective caregivers. So if you were harmed as a kid, if a really bad thing happened to you, for example, some sort of abuse from a teacher or a coach, if you could run home and tell your mom and dad what happened, and you were received, and they helped you process your feelings, and they provided protection by engaging with the person who did the harm and stopping it from happening again, that will be a bad event in your life, but it will not be a traumatic experience for you.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it won't become what's called an embedded trauma.
Right.
And so trauma is about what happens in your body in the absence of proper support, care, witness.
Right. And so as we interact in our daily lives with our families, in our ministries, so many people are on the other side of our trauma.
Yes.
And I know for me, I'm 55 and I'm just now paying attention to some of these
That's
things.
right.
And I'm going,
That's right.
oh my gosh. Like, I remember a friend of mine used to say this phrase, what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Yeah.
And guys, as you listen to Adam and I, our heart is those of you in ministry to go, it's so much more than about singing the song and preaching the sermon and growing the churches. If we will pay attention to our story, if we will pay attention to how the enemy tried to harm us and is still trying, man, it's a game changer for our own bodies, the bodies of our family around us, and the people that God's called us to. You've heard of this guy. I found him online through my friend Tom, but Ryan Kuja has a thing. He says the opposite of trauma is connection.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's what we try to do at Worship Circle is like, hey, ministry people, be connected.
Yes.
And don't be alone in the telling of your story. Don't be alone in the journey you're on day to day and what God's got you called to do. Connection is healing.
Yes. And that's because we're created in the image of a triune God, a we and not an I.
Right.
What that means is that I cannot heal, I can't grow, I can't mature with my Bible, a journal, a cup of coffee, and a good view out the window. I need you. I need others.
Right.
I need care from other witnesses and other guides who can help bear witness to my story, hear me, name me well in the context of my story, grieve with me, rage with me, celebrate with me. But I need the presence of others to heal. I can't do it by myself.
Man. You mentioned something when we were working together, and I was talking to a friend who's a worship leader. He's got a family, young kids, the other day on the phone, and he's going through a lot, Adam, and he's like, man, I feel like I'm really angry at God right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think God can handle that. And
yes,
you have to acknowledge that that's real. And, for a lot of us that grew up in the church, it's like, well, we have to be nice.
That's right.
We have to keep the peace. We can't let out any anger or disappointment we have. God can't handle that.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And, the irony, of course, is that the Bible, especially the Hebrew scriptures, is full of expressions of anger at God. The book of Lamentations, so many Psalms where the psalmist, the writer, will accuse God of abandonment. The book of Job, over and over, accusations that God has not been with Job
Right.
in his moment of greatest need. And what a lot of Christians have to come to terms with is that at the end of the book of Job, God says that Job has spoken rightly of him. Now, what do you do with that as a Christian? Because Job said some very accusatory things about God. And in my opinion, it's not that Job's accusations are theologically accurate. It's that God was saying, your heart, Job, in bringing your anger to me was right and good, and I honor it.
That's so good. Yeah, you had a quote on your site, Adam. I read this and it'll lead us somewhere, but you said, reflecting on your stories of harm and heartache is precisely what is required to know something about what you're called to do in this world. So instead of it being introspective navel gazing, looking at your story will make you a more loving, empathetic person. Knowing where you've come from, including the ways you've been wounded, is part of what it means to be, and you said, a deep follower of Christ.
That's it.
And I was like, tell me more about being a deep follower of Christ, because, my whole paradigm for the first, 4 decades of my life has been, man, memorize the stuff, be obedient, don't mess up, make the wise decision. And no one ever talked about looking back. Because you mentioned that verse, forgetting what lies behind, I press forward to the call of. And it's like, I want to be a deep follower of Christ, and I want our listeners to go, it is not selfish for me to pay attention to me and what happened to me.
Yeah. And again, this is about the body. God made your brain with this thing called a default mode network. It's like the Mr. T part of your brain, the midline, like if you had a mohawk, that's where your default mode network is. And what that portion of the brain is designed to allow you to reflect on yourself and your past and your emotions and your sensations. So God made you with the equipment to do this thing that some Christians pejoratively call dwelling on the past. That phrase has gotten such a bad rap, dwelling on the past. But look, in Genesis, when God meets Hagar, he asks her to dwell on the past. He says, where have you come from? And I think the Spirit of God asks each one of us that question. Where have you come from? Because it matters to God where I've come from. And asking that question and reflecting on that will go back to the Hagar story. The next question God says is, and where are you going? In other words, there's a linkage between where you've come from and where you're going.
Yeah, so good. So guys that are listening, ladies, we're kind of going to ask that question as a ministry as we head into 2025. It's just, where have you come from? And there's a reason why. And I went to Colorado not too long ago and spent some time with Adam and his wife, Caroline. And Adam, just touching on some of my story, when I got back home and started being around my kids, and then even in ministry, people said, something's different with you. You seem lighter. And even in leading worship, it was like, man, it's like you've hit a different gear and it seems free.
Yes.
And I'm like, so I walked away and I'm like, Lord, what are you up to? I want this for my other brothers and sisters that have been weighed down by not paying attention to the things that Jesus wants to heal. And you mentioned on our call the other day, it's like you may have had a trauma that's like a broken leg, that's like you're barely walking. Yep. You're just doing all you can to get by. It may be that you had something that maybe wasn't as extreme, but it's still there and it's a splinter in your foot and you walk kind of funky, and everybody else notices that they can't put their finger on it, but something's there.
Yes.
So you guys, we as a ministry, and we're headed in a direction of paying attention to our stories, because after doing this for 10 years, we can tell you all day long how to set up a song, how to lead a team, how to build a church. But unless you're being built, unless you're being restored, healed, paying attention to the stuff under the hood, it's not going to be done in a way, I think, that could lead to you being in a lane and in your calling in such a way that you feel just the breath and glory of God in what you do. So we want that for you. So Adam, tell everybody, you've got a book coming out, I know soon. You showed me the cover of it.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep in touch with you through Podcast World. And Adam's actually going to be working with Kathy Lorzell, who's going to be at Rest Retreat. So if you're listening to this and you haven't signed up for Rest, worshipcircle.com/rest, we're going to dig into a little bit of story at the retreat. So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I want to come check that out, or you want to sign up for the term next year, we're going to all be digging into this. Our coaches are going to be working with Adam and Kathy. It's just going to be so fun. So anything you'd say, Adam, to just, again, the why, like why would we come off this podcast and want to pay attention to, our story? Because I'm a song singer and I'm behind a microphone and, man, I don't got time for that. I got sermons to prepare.
Right. Well, any artist knows that the more authentic you can be with your voice, that changes your presence.
Yes.
And your presence is what the people are responding to when you are leading them in worship. So two people can play the same song and sing the same melody with very different presences. Wow. And what I would say is that until you've engaged your story and come home to your body and know how to be in your body with rest, with joy, with vitality, you will, until that has happened through the work that you've done with your story, you will necessarily be forced into some measure of performance rather than presence.
Man, you way to wrap us up with, that's why we're doing this. We want presence over performance. I've even said, and you told me this, man, it's like so much of my life was trying to be somebody I thought I was supposed to be.
Right.
Even in singing, it's like, man, I want to sound like Bono,
Right. Yeah.
And then, or man, I remember when I was a kid and I first got Journey's Escape album, I was like, dude, to be able to sing like Steve Perry, God, why didn't I get that voice?
Right.
And then, sitting with you and Caroline, it was like, hey, Todd, what if God's idea was for you to be you?
There it is.
What if your voice was who he created you to be, and you just got to rest in that? And so, you guys, Adam and I would just say we want you all to know how precious you are, how unique you are, what a masterpiece you are, and that you're so much more than what God's asked you to do for him. He's asked you to rest with him and in him. And just to remember, that's been a joy for me, Adam, to go back and just kind of sit with some of these memories, man. And in the midst of the harm, there's also a lot of good.
Yes.
I mean, there's literally like, fall is coming here in Georgia, and I can feel in my body the change of the cool and the less humidity. And I'm like, Lord, thank you that that's familiar to me. Yeah. Because it was familiar to me when I was a little boy like you on the soccer field at 5 or 6.
Yeah.
In the fall, feeling the joy of those games, And it's God going, I've always been with you.
Yeah.
And I'm still there, and I'm not going to leave you alone. You guys, you're loved and not alone. Check it out, worshipcircle.com/rest for the retreat coming up in October. We'd love to have you there. We still have a few spots left, and you can sign up to the term. Just go to the website. Adam, what's the name of your new book, and when does it come out?
It's called Make Sense of Your Story, and it comes out, well, you can pre-order it now anywhere books are sold, but it is released March 4th, 2025.
March 4th, 2025. And just to piggyback off that, guys, if you haven't listened to Adam's podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves, there is a treasure trove of helps on there. And so you guys keep following us. We're going to have Kathy on next. She's going to be at the Rest Retreat. We're going to keep talking about story and why it's important. We're going to be hitting on this theme. But Adam, thank you so much, brother, for pursuing me after you saw me in February, for being so kind and generous to me and my family. And just pray your blessing, God's blessing on your ministry. And can't wait to see what he's going to do as we continue this conversation with leaders and pastors.
Thanks, Todd. I love it. I love what you guys are doing.
You bet.